All right, welcome everybody to Healthcare Reform and Immigration Status in California. Thank you for joining us. My name is Kellen Russoniello. I'm a staff attorney at the ACLU, San Diego, and Imperial counties. A few logistics before we get started. If you look at the panel on your right, you'll see a section labeled questions. Please feel free to type in your questions throughout the webinar, and we'll do our best during the Q&A section at the end to answer them. If we don't get to your question, we'll reach out to you in the next few days. Additionally, recording of this webinar and the slides will be made available within the next few days. So I'll do short introductions of the speakers, and then we'll dive right in. So again, my name is Kellen Russoniello. I'm a staff attorney with the ACLU, San Diego, Imperial counties. I've been with the ACLU since last September. I obtained my BA from Eastern Washington University and my law degree and master's in public health from the George Washington University. My background is in drug policy and criminal justice reform, having interned with organizations focused on these issues. Current work focuses on the overlap of the criminal justice system and the Affordable Care Act. I also currently sit on the board of directors of Students for Sensible Drug Policy. Our second panelist will be Gabrielle Lessard, a health policy attorney at the National Immigration Law Center. Gabrielle specializes in the laws and policies affecting access to health care for immigrants and their families, in particular the implementation of the Affordable Care Act and the maintenance and expansion of safety net services for immigrants left uninsured. She writes articles and policy analyses, provides technical assistance, and presents trainings to legal and social service providers, government agencies, legislative staff, and community-based organizations. Ms. Lessard was previously the legal director of the Insight Center for Community Economic Development and a Skadden Fellow at the National Economic Development and Law Center. She holds a Juris Doctor degree from the University of Wisconsin Law School. Our third panelist is Betzabel Estudillo. Betzabel is California Immigrant Policy Center's health policy coordinator based in Los Angeles. Previously, she was a community coordinator for the Clean Car Wash campaign organizing immigrant car wash workers in Los Angeles. While in graduate school, she interned with the Los Angeles County Department of Mental Health, analyzing health policies and providing best practices when working with immigrants. She has also been a community organizer in multiple immigrant youth groups, including Ideas at UCLA, Dream Team Los Angeles, Graduates Reaching a Dream Deferred, and the Circle Project. She obtained her MSW from the University of California, Los Angeles, and a BA in political science from the University of California, Los Angeles. So moving right into the presentations today, I'll be giving basics of the Affordable Care Act as they apply to the presentation of how immigration status impacts eligibility for health care coverage. So a little bit about the ACLU, San Diego, and Imperial counties. We fight for individual rights and fundamental freedoms for all through education, litigation, and policy advocacy. Our three main focus areas are immigrants' rights, criminal justice and drug policy reform, and voting rights. I'm also focusing on the overlap of the Affordable Care Act and criminal justice system, so if you have questions regarding that, please feel free to contact me after this presentation. So a little overview about what I'll be talking about. I'm going to be going over Medi-Cal expansion, covered California, residency, the individual mandate and exceptions to it, and open enrollment and special enrollment periods. Hopefully you won't feel like this guy drowning in all this healthcare stuff once we get over the basics. One sec, technical difficulties. Okay, there we go. So about Medi-Cal expansion. Medicaid is a joint federal and state-funded program, and states administer the program and must conform to the federal regulations. And states must cover certain categories such as age, blind, disabled, and pregnant women and children. And basically what it is it provides health coverage to low-income residents who fall into, previously had to fall into a certain category, but with the Affordable Care Act, states have the option of expanding health care coverage to cover most adults under the age of 65 with incomes at or below 138% of the federal poverty level. You can see what that is for an individual and a family before on the slide there. California is a state that has opted to expand Medi-Cal or Medicaid, and California's Medicaid program is called Medi-Cal. under the, so as you can see, so the eligibility for the new population is based on projected annual income, which is called MAGI, which stands for Modified Adjusted Gross Income. And assets are not considered for this group. It used to be part of the calculation for determining Medicaid eligibility for the newly eligible population. And for certain other categories, such as parents, children, and pregnant women, this new MAGI will be used. And then a difference between full scope Medi-Cal and restricted scope Medi-Cal. So full scope Medi-Cal is available where all eligibility requirements are met, including immigration status. And this gives the full range of coverage, including hospitalizations, outpatient treatment, prescription drugs, mental health and substance use disorder treatment, and so on. Limited, restricted, or emergency scope Medi-Cal is available to those who meet income and residency requirements but are ineligible for full scope coverage due to immigration status. Limited scope Medi-Cal provides coverage for emergency, pregnancy-related services, dialysis, and long-term care. So moving on to Covered California. Covered California is California's health benefit exchange. Under the Affordable Care Act, each state will have its own health benefit exchange or can have the federal government maintain its health exchange for them. California opted to have its own health benefit exchange, and it calls it Covered California. Basically, this is a one-stop shop for insurance plans, including Medi-Cal. The so-called no wrong door, you can apply here, and they'll put you into whichever insurance plan will work for you. There are 4 levels of coverage: the bronze, silver, gold, and platinum based on the actuarial value. Not super important for purposes here, but also through Covered California, you can get advanced premium tax credits if your income is between 100% and 400% of the federal poverty level. 400% of the federal poverty level, just for reference, is $46,680 for an individual and $95,400 for a family of 4. And basically what these premium tax credits do are they lower the cost of a monthly premium, and that the amount that it lowers will be based on your income. So if you're more on the 100% side, it'll be a higher advanced premium tax credit to help you pay for your premium, and then it kind of slides down as your income rises. There are also additional cost-sharing subsidies if you apply for a silver plan, which will reduce the amount of money that you owe out of pocket, both on an annual basis and if you're 250% of the federal poverty level or lower, will decrease the amount that you have to pay out of pocket when you actually go to the doctor's office. A little bit more about Covered California. If you're eligible for Medi-Cal, you're not eligible for Covered California. And if you are lawfully present, and Gabrielle will be talking a little bit more about what that means, and would be eligible for Medi-Cal, but for your immigration status, you're eligible for coverage through Covered California. And if, in that case, if your income is below 100% of the federal poverty level, you'll be eligible for the same amount of financial assistance as if your income was 100% of the federal poverty level. So an example of that would be a non-immigrant status, such as a temporary worker or a student with a lower income that would be ineligible for Medi-Cal based on immigration status. So residency is a requirement for both Medi-Cal and Covered California. Basically, to be a resident, you have to live in California and have the intent to remain here indefinitely, or you entered the state with a job commitment or to seek employment. You can't own or lease a principal residence outside of California, but basically a person's declaration along with evidence submitted proving residency is accepted as proof unless there's evidence to the contrary. And this may present as problems where a person's visa will expire after a certain term. And just to be clear, residency is different than immigration status. For example, you can be a resident of California, but also be undocumented. And this is important for access to a restricted scope Medi-Cal, where you can be a resident, but not necessarily your immigration status would bar you from full scope Medi-Cal. And again, the residency may be difficult to prove for non-immigrant statuses. The next basic thing is the individual mandate, which is basically most people must have coverage or pay a tax penalty. And you can see here what that is per year. The big thing to notice here is that in 2014, it's a little bit lower, but by the time we get to 2016, it's actually a pretty substantial penalty. This is prorated by the number of months without coverage. And then there are certain caps on that, on the amount that you could pay each year, depending on your income. So exceptions to the individual mandate. The two highlighted in red are particularly important for the presentation today. So one is if you're not lawfully present in the United States, and again, Gabrielle will explain a little bit more what that means. The other is if you're not a resident alien under federal tax law. And this isn't so much an exemption from the individual mandate as it is in the definition of who the mandate applies to. But nonetheless, if you're not considered a resident alien, then you do not need to pay the mandate if you don't have coverage. And there are two tests for determining whether or not you qualify as a resident alien. First is the green card test, which is if you're in if any time during the calendar year you were a lawful permanent resident of the United States and the status has not been rescinded or determined to have been abandoned, you've met this test and what will be considered a resident alien. The other is the substantial presence test, which is quite complicated, and when you get these slides in a few days, you can see that the resident alien part of this is hyperlinked, so you can click on that. It'll take you to the IRS definition on how you can determine whether or not you qualify. But basically, it depends on the amount of time that you spend in the United States during a calendar year. And for migrant workers, the days that you commute to the United States from residents in Canada or Mexico, if you regularly commute, are not considered as days counted for this test. So migrant workers, a lot of the time, will not be considered resident aliens and therefore not subject to the individual mandate. Finally, open enrollment. So there's no, I just want to highlight there's no open enrollment period for Medi-Cal. You can apply at any point throughout the year. So that's very important for potentially a lot of the folks that you'll be working with. The first open enrollment period for Covered California, and basically what this means is this is a period of time where you can apply for plans through Covered California. Outside of the open enrollment period, you'll need to have what's called a special enrollment period, which I'll cover in a second. But generally, you have to apply during one of the open enrollment periods, the first of which ended on March 31st, 2014. And the next one, although not set in stone, will probably be November 15th, 2014 through February 15th, 2015. And this is just a picture here of President Obama on a show called Between Two Ferns. He did an interview to try and get the young people to sign up right at the end of the open enrollment period. If you're looking for something funny, I encourage you to check that out. And then finally, the special enrollment periods. These are 60-day enrollment periods triggered by what's called a qualifying life event. One of these, again, highlighted in red, is you become a citizen, national, or a lawfully present person. And then there's a bunch of others listed here, loss of coverage, which includes losing your job-based coverage, maybe due to losing your job, through divorce, your individual policy plan ends with outside of an open enrollment period, things like that. And you can go through and look through on the rest of here, but the first one's most applicable to today's webinar. And here are some resources that I encourage you to look at. The first is the ACLU and the California Immigrant Policy Center teamed up to make a fact sheet available both in English and Spanish. That's a summary of your eligibility based on immigration status for Covered California, Medi-Cal, and the applicability of the individual mandate. And a special thanks to National Immigration Law Center and the National Health Law Program for the help on that. We also have a little cheat sheet available in English and Spanish. That's a really kind of quick and dirty summary of eligibility. And then some other links here for more information on the things that I talked about. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Gabrielle.
Okay, thanks, Kellen. For people who joined late, that was not Anna Castro. Do I have control of the slides now?
Yep.
Oh, here we go. Okay. So I am with the National Immigration Law Center, and we are a national organization, as our name implies, that works on behalf of low-income immigrants and their family members. And we do training and technical assistance, develop resources, and do strategic litigation. I'm having trouble advancing the slides here, sorry. There we go. Okay, so we're going to quickly go through 3 areas: immigrants in California, the eligibility requirements for public health programs, and the barriers that immigrants experience when they try to apply for health care. So obviously you know, because you're on this call, that there's a very large immigrant population in California. We have over 10 million people who are foreign born, and about half of those people have become naturalized citizens. We estimate that there are about 2.3 million undocumented people, and that they constitute close to a quarter of the national undocumented population. Come on, slide. Okay, whoops. Okay, and then many of the immigrants in California and nationally live in mixed status families. That means families where some people have, varying immigration statuses. So many California immigrants live in families with citizens, and in fact, half of California children have at least one immigrant parent, even though the vast majority of those children themselves are citizens. The number is even higher for low-income children. And then we estimate that about 13% of California children have a parent who's undocumented, which is an issue in the enrollment process. So immigrants are more likely than people who were born in the U.S. to be uninsured, and they actually use fewer health care services than citizens who have the same insurance status. So if you look at uninsured immigrants to uninsured U.S.-born citizens, you're going to see lower utilization. And that utilization is disparity is even higher with respect to undocumented immigrants. UCLA Center for Health Policy Studies just came out with some research that shows that undocumented immigrants use many fewer health services than citizens, as well as lawfully present immigrants who have the same insurance status. Okay, so moving on to the eligibility requirements. I'm going to be talking about the eligibility requirements that are specifically tied to immigration. So it's helpful to just step back for a second and talk about the way that people get different immigration statuses. So people come into the U.S. lawfully in 3 general ways. They come in with some sort of visa that sets them on a path to becoming a lawful permanent resident. They can also come in as non-immigrants with a visa such as a student visa or a tourist visa who are admitted for a temporary stay. And then we also have many categories of people who come in as humanitarian entrants. And the largest categories of those are refugees, who are admitted because they face persecution due to their race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or membership in a particular social group. And they have to demonstrate that. Or asylees, who are similar to refugees, but they tend to apply for the status after they have actually entered the United States. Then, of course, we have undocumented immigrants. And people become undocumented immigrants either because they came into the U.S. without inspection, so they crossed the border, or they had a temporary visa and they stayed past the expiration of that visa. Another category of people are those who have deferred action for childhood arrivals. And this was under an executive order or non-executive order, some administrative action by President Obama. And it allows people who are essentially the dreamers, undocumented immigrants who came to the U.S. before they were 16 years of age, and have either enrolled in or completed education that is intended to lead to employment, typically high school, college, or some kind of vocational training, and have been continuously present since June 15, 2007. So in order to qualify for this status, people have to be able to document that they have all of those factors, which is really a challenge. Now, as Kellen talked about, we have several coverage options in California. primarily covered California and the new expanded Medi-Cal program, as well as a number of safety net programs such as services available at federally qualified health centers and other community clinics, public hospitals, charity care, and some smaller focused state programs. Now, to talk about, in order to understand Medicaid eligibility, we need to understand eligibility for federal benefits, and that involves a bit of a history lesson. As Kellen talked about, Medicaid, or Medi-Cal in California, is a joint state and federal program. So California needs to implement the program in accordance with the federal rules. Now, those rules changed dramatically in 1996 when Congress made a distinction between lawfully present immigrants who were deemed to be qualified for federal benefits eligibility purposes and those who were deemed to be not qualified. Qualified immigrants can receive federally funded benefits, but the same law barred many of them from receiving federal benefits until they have been in the United States for 5 years, or actually been in the qualified status for 5 years. Now, in California, we don't really see that because the state uses its own funds to provide benefits to people who are subject to this 5-year bar. But I wanted to talk about it because I know it's a source of a lot of confusion. So again, you'll hear about it if you attend a national training or look at materials developed for a national audience, but it will not affect immigrants in California. Now, who are the qualified immigrants? Qualified immigrants are, speaking in general terms, people who are lawful permanent residents, so often colloquially called green card holders. In addition to that, we have a number of categories of people who are generally in that humanitarian entrance catch-all. So that includes refugees, asylees, people who have received certain visas for domestic violence survivors as well as their family members, people who've received certain visas for survivors of human trafficking and their family members, and people who worked for the United States as translators or drivers or other kinds of assistants in Iraq or Afghanistan and were persecuted for that reason, but that reason doesn't fall into one of those very specific categories for refugee status, so they actually get their own status. And then there are a number of other categories of humanitarian entrants. These are mostly well, people granted withholding of deportation or removal is a special category of people that were in administrative process to be removed, but they received essentially a stay on that action. And then other categories of people that are generally people that were granted those statuses quite a long time ago, like before 1980. There is on our website a list of all of the specific statuses that would make somebody a qualified immigrant, so you can look at that in detail. Now, states do get some flexibility within the federal system. So in the state child health insurance program, which was originally implemented in California as Healthy Families and has now been rolled into Medi-Cal, states are actually able to provide prenatal services to pregnant women regardless of their immigration status because the fetus essentially is deemed to be a future U.S. citizen who is currently receiving those services. And then states are also able to use their own funds to provide Medicaid or CHIP to qualified immigrants during the 5-year bar, as we talked about. People who are permanently residing under color of law, which we call PRU-CAL, which is essentially people whom the Homeland Security knows are present but does not intend to deport. And of course, California has exercised all of these options. So that's Medi-Cal eligibility, and that's eligibility for full scope Medi-Cal, not the restricted scope. Moving on from there to look at eligibility for covered California. Now, covered California, or the state exchanges, state and federal exchanges nationally, are open to anybody who is a lawfully present immigrant. So lawfully present immigrants include all of the immigrants who are in those qualified statuses, as well as other people who are lawfully present. There is one exception, specific exception, For people who received deferred action through the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program, they were administratively and specifically excluded from eligibility for the state and federal exchanges. Now, lawfully present immigrants include, again, all qualified immigrants, people who have permission to stay in the U.S. for an indefinite period of time. Temporary protected status is something that's common in California. And then most people with deferred action other than DACA, people who are in the process of applying to become lawful permanent residents or some other statuses, and people who have valid non-immigrant visas who are not in violation of the terms of their visas. So people who have H-1B visas, for example, pretty much everybody who's work eligible, student visas, who don't have other student health coverage, etc. So again, there's a complete list available on our website for your reference. Now, people who have deferred action for childhood arrivals, again, are excluded from the federal and state-run exchanges, so they're exempt from the individual mandate, but they can't get premium tax credits and other kinds of cost-sharing and reductions, or even buy coverage through the exchanges without getting a subsidy. However, California classifies people who have received DACA as PRUCALs, permanently residing under color of law, in its Medi-Cal program. So if they're otherwise eligible for Medi-Cal, meaning that they meet the income and residency requirements, people who have DACA can get Medi-Cal. If they're above the Medi-Cal income limit, then they have pretty much the same options as undocumented people. So what are those options? Undocumented residents who are below the Medi-Cal income limit can receive restricted scope Medi-Cal. So that's primarily for emergencies, pregnancy, and then there's some other programs like long-term care, dialysis. They remain eligible for health programs that were available before the implementation of the Affordable Care Act, so all the public health programs like vaccines for children. They still, well, hospitals are still required to provide emergency care to anybody who comes in regardless of their insurance or immigration status. They can get help through community health centers. They can get employer-sponsored group health insurance. So for example, an undocumented spouse of an employee could be covered as a dependent. And then they can also purchase insurance through the private marketplace by going to a broker or directly to an insurance company. And then there's a whole list of California programs that are available to people regardless of their immigration status. And I'm just going to leave that slide with you for reference because we don't have time to go through it. So to move on to the barriers, there are a lot of factors that keep immigrants from applying for health insurance and other benefits to which they're entitled. One of the major ones is that there's a lack of information or a lot of misinformation that circulates in the community. So people are often concerned that receiving benefits or having medical debt is going to interfere with their ability to adjust their immigration status later, or that if they get something from a public program, it's going to jeopardize their family members, or they believe that the benefits will need to be repaid. And there are all kinds of rumors like your kids are going to be conscripted when the draft is reinstated, or they can't get federal financial aid. There's obviously a lot of confusion about eligibility because it's complicated, and there have been a series of problems in the application process on both covered California and the federal exchange, as well as language barriers. Now, public charge, I just want to spend a few seconds on this, is an issue that comes up and sort of gives rise to the concern that people are going to be required to repay benefits that they've received or that they're going to have trouble adjusting their immigration status. A person is considered a public charge if they are primarily dependent on the government for subsistence. And this is demonstrated in two ways. Either they're receiving cash assistance for income maintenance, so something like TANF or general assistance, or they're institutionalized for long-term care at government expense. So a person who's found likely to become a public charge can be denied admission to the United States, or they can be denied the ability to adjust their immigration status to become a lawful permanent resident. So public charge is not a concern for people who are receiving any kind of health care benefits other than long-term care, as well as people that are receiving non-cash benefits like SNAP or food assistance, as well as for people who are already lawful permanent residents, because again, it just comes up in that determination process. Verification is something that is important to understand because this is a source of concern for people on the federal and state exchanges. So for everybody who's applying for health coverage for themselves, citizenship or lawful presence is verified. Now, that status is verified electronically for U.S.-born citizens through the Social Security Administration database, and for naturalized citizens and other lawfully present immigrants through the SAVE database, which is operated by USCIS, which is part of Homeland Security. Now, all the information on the exchange is confidential, but you can't tell people, oh, well, immigration will not have access to your information, because if you are an applicant for insurance for yourself, then that verification process will take place. And then people's income is verified by the IRS electronically, generally if they have a Social Security number only. If people's status or income cannot be verified electronically, then people do have the opportunity to provide other documents by uploading them, although often that doesn't work, or mailing or faxing them in. Now, Social Security numbers are the primary way that people are identified on the exchanges. So it's important to emphasize that only people applying for benefits are required to provide information about their immigration and citizenship status, which is not the same as Social Security number, but people think about those things in tandem. It is possible for the exchange to ask the Social Security number of a person who's not applying for benefits for themselves in order to verify the household income. So, for example, a person who had health coverage through their work or was exempt for some reason and had an SSN could provide their SSN on an application for their benefit for health coverage for their children. A person who's not applying for themselves can only be required to provide an SSN if three things are true. That person is the primary tax filer for the household, has an SSN, and is applying for tax credits. Now, this again feeds into the important issues affecting mixed status families. We have a lot of families in California where the parents are undocumented and the children are U.S. citizens. Those children are not exempt from the individual mandate. The parents are going to be subject to a tax penalty if they don't get their children covered. Also, it's important for children to get covered. So undocumented people are able to apply for coverage on behalf of their dependent family members. The application process should distinguish clearly between who is an applicant, the child, and who's a non-applicant, the undocumented parent. So, for example, on Covered California, you enter the household information, and then for each person to ask, is this person applying for health insurance for themselves? So the undocumented parent would say no, and for the children, they would say yes. Again, non-applicants are not required to provide their immigration status. If they don't have an SSN, they can't be required to provide one. Now, some people have an SSN that they use for work that was not issued to them by the Social Security Administration. They do not want to use that number on the exchange. Some people also have individual taxpayer identification numbers that were issued by the IRS. They shouldn't put those numbers into the exchange either. It won't help them because the IRS is not electronically verifying income with ITINs, and even though the exchange is confidential, it's just one more place where people are providing a red flag that they're undocumented. So we encourage people against that. Now, again, the law and regulation around the ACA is that information provided on an application can be used only to determine eligibility for health insurance, and there are new regulations that are going to impose tax penalties on people who misuse or disclose that information. Now, because people's status is verified through access to that USCIS database, we wanted to get some confirmation from the Department of Homeland Security that that information would not be used in immigration enforcement. And the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Division of the Department of Homeland Security has put out a memo that clarifies that none of the information that's provided through a health insurance exchange can be used for immigration enforcement purposes. Okay, I'm just going to spend a minute on language access before turning it over to Betsy. Just to let people know, Covered California only provides an online application in English and Spanish. There is a paper application available in multiple languages, as well as fact sheets available in multiple languages, but they're really, it's our position that they really need to step up their game and make the online application process, as well as assistance, available in many more of the languages that are spoken in California. Oh, and one final tip, if you are a consumer or working with a consumer in the application process and you get stuck, contact the Health Consumer Alliance. They have received funding specifically for the purpose of helping people navigate issues in Covered California. And then here's some resources for you to look at later, and I'm turning it over now to Betsy. Uh-oh.
Thank you, Gabrielle. Can everyone hear me? Okay. So as I was introduced in the beginning of the webinar, my name is Betzabel Estudillo. I'm the Health Policy Coordinator for the California Immigrant Policy Center. There we go. And let me see. Okay, I'm trying to, next slide. There we go. Okay, so the California Immigrant Policy Center was founded in 1996. CIPC is a nonpartisan, nonprofit statewide organization that seeks to inform the public debate and policy decisions on issues affecting the state's immigrants and their families in order to improve the quality of life for all Californians. CIPC engages in policy advocacy and also provides technical assistance, training on and education on immigrant issues. We have 3 offices, one located in Los Angeles, one in Oakland, and one in Sacramento. So as Gabrielle and Kellen were discussing about the healthcare reform and also the Medi-Cal expansion and opportunities for immigrants, we're living in a new era of lots of opportunities for all Californians and all people in the United States. However, there's beginning this year about 2 to 3 million people will continue to be uninsured, and about 1 million plus actually will be undocumented Californians. And that was a research that was introduced by the UC Berkeley research team, UC Berkeley Labor Center research team, the beginning of this year. And so why is health for all important? So throughout our, as Gabrielle and Kellen had mentioned, there's lots of opportunities for immigrants with the Medi-Cal expansion, with the implementation of the Affordable Care Act, but there continues to be some gaps in services for immigrant communities, particularly the undocumented. Through the system, the state provides some health care services with limited scope or duration or limited time. So this includes like restricted Medi-Cal, which is available to all Californians regardless of immigration status. And there are some safety net programs or programs in counties that provide some services to their residents regardless of status. So for example, in LA, there's a program called Healthy Way LA, which is transitioning into Healthy Way LA 2.0 that provides some type of services for all Angelenos regardless of immigration status. However, this is still not enough. There's actually many other counties that don't provide services to the undocumented, one of them being Fresno County. They're actually Fresno County Board of Supervisors is attempting to lift the decades-old court injunction mandating it provide health care to all residents through its Medically Indigent Services Program, the MISP program. And so in Fresno, they're having their own fight in making sure that this program continues to be available for all Fresnians, regardless of their immigration statuses. And so, you know, just on these two examples on Los Angeles and Fresno, there's gaps in coverage for immigrant communities in California. So it depends where you live. Really depends the type of access to care you have. So if you're in Contra Costa, Riverside, Sacramento, then you don't have, as an undocumented person, you don't have access to care. So we know that this is not enough. We actually want to make sure that every Californian has access to care, regardless where you live or where you were born or what your current immigration status is. Our healthcare system works better when everyone participates. We know that our healthcare system works best when everyone is a member of the system, everyone's paying into it accordingly and to their ability. And if anyone is left out, actually that weakens our whole system. Emergency room treatment is expensive, and this is such a great point. A lot of undocumented people rely on emergency care treatment because this is available to everyone, regardless of immigration status. And a lot of undocumented communities, their first access to care is the emergency room. And so we know that emergency room treatment is quite expensive. And so if we provide health for everyone and everyone has access to a doctor or preventive care, and if we substitute that emergency care to regular medical care, that can actually prevent a lot of painful chronic conditions before they begin. So it really does make sense to provide every Californian and the ability to seek care and see a doctor. We also understand that if there could be potential cost savings in the healthcare spending in relation to the emergency care treatment. And then also, there's a lot of children, immigrant children, who have access to these type of services, the healthcare system, the safety net program services. And so if we provide access to their parents as well, we know that healthy parents also equals to thriving families. And also, undocumented immigrants are a major economic engine for California, and they contribute to the state revenue, from putting food on your table to playing key roles in so many other industries. Undocumented Californians play a major role in our state's economic life. Just in 2010 alone, the undocumented Californians provided $2.2 billion in state and local taxes. And so they definitely contribute to this economy, and it only makes sense for us as Californians to include undocumented immigrants into our healthcare system. And lastly, health is a human right. The ability to be healthy, be with your family, be happy is something that every family should have the ability to do so. So with that said, beginning this year on February 13, Senator Ricardo Lara introduced a bill, SB 1005, called the Health for All bill. There was a press conference in Los Angeles on February 14 on Valentine's Day, where many community members, advocates, health providers were present supporting the bill. There was lots of community members, lots of doctors and health practitioners who saw a need to provide care for every Californian and were there. Currently, there's a strong legislative support. You'll find all the list of Assembly co-authors and Senator co-authors on the slide. And the list of co-authorship continues to grow. There's lots of conversations that are ongoing and lots of senators who have shared that they would like to be a co-author. And so what does the bill do? SB 1005 will expand access to health care coverage to all Californians regardless of immigration status with two ways, by providing full scope Medi-Cal and also implementing a mirror exchange. So what this means is that the bill, if passed, would authorize enrollment into the Medi-Cal program for all Californians regardless of immigration status. What essentially this means is that it would remove the immigrant eligibility requirement from Medi-Cal, and this would provide Medi-Cal coverage up to 138% of the federal poverty level for adults and 266% of the federal poverty level for children, immigrant children, who are not currently eligible for full-scope Medi-Cal because of their immigration status. And then also the bill would also create a mirror or parallel exchange. So this means a third exchange operated by Covered California, which will be funded by the state-only dollars, and premiums will be paid for those that participate in this exchange. And so SB 1005 really will make sure that everyone in our communities have access to quality and affordable care affordable health care. We know that when we have everyone into a system, that everyone, all of us as a state, do better. And so right after the bill was introduced, CIPC's California Immigrant Health Network and many of our partners actually went on an Undocu Caravan health justice journey, and the Undocu Caravan was inspired by the Undocu bus, and the Undocu bus was actually a school bus that was that traveled throughout the nation and our state, filled with community activists, community members, undocumented people advocating for the driver's license for all and the Trust Act and other issues that benefit immigrant communities. And so inspired by the Undocu bus, we descended on an Undocu Caravan with a C-A-R-E, and the caravan traveled over 600 miles to create awareness and advocate for the bill. We made 5 regional stops, one in San Isidro, Santa Ana, Los Angeles, Pomona, and Fresno. And our final stop was on April 30th, where the bill was heard in the Senate Health Committee. In each of these stops, there was a town hall, a press event, or a community talking circle. And as you can see, these are some of the pictures of our health justice journey. This is where we went to San Diego at the bottom right. We were in Pomona on the top right, and then we finalized our journey in Sacramento, where we had a rally, a community rally, right outside the Capitol. So where are we now? So as I had mentioned, the caravan ended on April 30th because that's when the bill was going to be heard for the first time in the Senate Health Committee. We are excited to say that the bill has actually passed the Senate Health Committee and it's on to appropriations. There was it passed on a 6-to-1 vote, and all Democrat Senator committee members actually voted in favor. Now the bill is off to Appropriations Committee, and it's going to be heard Monday, May 19th, so actually less than a week from now. So what's the biggest challenge going into appropriations? We do know that there is going to be a fiscal impact, and so there's something that we're going to be discussing in appropriations, as well as looking at different creative funding sources to be able to fund this bill. But you know what I say to everyone, the greatest challenge really is not providing access to care to all Californians. So what can you do as an individual or as a member of an organization? Well, you can actually get involved. You can work with advocates. You can join many community actions and town halls. You can attend a hearing. You can share your story. And you can share this information in the social media. We have 2 hashtags. We have the Health for All hashtag, and we also have the hashtag SB1005. We're also looking at collecting stories. We know that stories are very powerful, and that can not only put a face to the issue, but also mobilize many of our community around this. And so we're asking, we partnered up with the Dream Resource Center, and we're asking community members and advocates to share their story. And you can find all that information of how to get engaged in our website at caimmigrant.org. You can also find more information on undocumenteduninsured.org or our undocuhealth.blogspot.com, where you will find all the information regarding our caravan journey and pictures and how to get involved. And if you would like further information, you can feel free to contact me at the information or Ronald Coleman, our Government Affairs Manager. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Betsy and Gabrielle. So if you have any questions, feel free to enter those into the question box on the right side of your screen, and we'll try and get to those. If we don't get to them, we will follow up with you after the webinar is over. And we have got a lot of questions about whether or not the materials will be available afterwards. They will be. We'll make sure that the slides are made available for download, and that also a recording of the webinar will be distributed. So one question that we did get was, and this is for Gabrielle, is for Medi-Cal, do you need to be a citizen, or do you just need to be a legal resident in order to get full scope Medi-Cal?
Okay, in order to get full scope Medi-Cal, you need to be a citizen or a qualified immigrant. So when you get the slides and you go back to my slides or you look on the NILC website, you can see the list of qualified immigrants that includes lawful permanent residents, refugees, asylees, other kinds of humanitarian entrants. And you can also get it if you are permanently residing under color of law or protocol, which includes people who've been granted DACA.
Great. And our next question is, I'll open it up to whoever wants to answer it. Do you know what the reasoning was for excluding DACA recipients from covered California?
I can take that. If people remember during the State of the Union address, and the name of the particular Republican representative who yelled at the president that he was lying about not opening access to health care up to undocumented people, that really got under his skin. And it was an issue when DACA was implemented. And essentially, they made this administrative decision to prove the president was not opening health coverage up to undocumented people by excluding the DACA.
Great. And then our next question is about the public charge. So how is long-term care defined for public charge, and does it include institutionalization?
It is specifically institutionalization at public expense. So, for example, if somebody were in a nursing home that was funded by Medicaid, that would be an example of long-term care. But, you know, that person is probably adjusting their status to become a lawful permanent resident is probably not their highest priority at that point.
Great. So the next question is, are there categories of people who are not eligible for coverage through Covered California and Medi-Cal to whom the individual mandate applies? I'll take a shot, and then if you guys want to fill in, feel free. So there are certain categories of people that there will be eligible for one or the other. So for example, a person who is lawfully present in the United States, say on a visa that's here long enough to be considered a resident alien, would be subject to the individual mandate. But that person might not necessarily be eligible for Medi-Cal just based on that they wouldn't be able to qualify as either PRU-Call, permanently residing under color of law, or may not even be able to qualify as a resident of California. So that's an example of where the individual mandate would apply, but you're ineligible for Medi-Cal. There aren't any examples where you're not eligible for either, but where the mandate would apply. And then, do you guys have anything to add to that?
That's right. In Medicaid expansion states like California, everybody who's subject to the individual mandate can either get Medicaid or get insurance through the exchange.
So we have time for one more question, and that is for those DACA applicants who make more money than the Medi-Cal income guidelines, would they qualify for Medi-Cal?
No, they don't.
Right, because you have to meet both the income and residency requirements.
Right. They have to, well, I mean, with one exception, if they're children, the Medi-Cal income guideline or income standard is higher. But essentially, to be eligible for Medi-Cal, the DACAs have to be eligible except for their immigration status, and then they can get pre-qual.
Okay.
And to add to that, you know, for DACA recipients, and just to clarify, so these are DACA recipients, youth who have been granted deferred action, and their opportunities are very limited. So it's either you qualify for Medi-Cal, or your employer provides health coverage, or you know, then you don't have access to care, or there may be some care in your county. And this is the reason why, you know, SB 1075 was introduced for this reason, to be able to provide undocumented Californians as well as DACA recipients with more opportunities for care.
Great. Unfortunately, we're out of time. So for those who did answer questions, we will make sure to get back to you individually. But I want to thank everybody for attending, and I also want to thank Gabrielle and Betzabel for participating in this webinar.
Okay, thank you.